Lightning talks are short format presentations where speakers get 3 minutes and one slide to talk about their work. The ability to synthesize a large amount of information into a short format that is engaging to a diverse audience is a useful and much needed skill. For young scholars, lightning talks help them showcase their delivery and build a foundation for how science can be communicated in an impactful manner. Today's lightning talk speakers were nominated by our faculty across Boise State academic colleges and chosen for their ability to articulate their research and demonstrate how their research experience fits into their overall undergraduate experience. Today, we have 12 lightning talk speakers who will be talking about their research projects. Please welcome them on stage.
Hi everybody, my name is Taya Burrow with the Department of Economics and Mathematics, and I did a fiscal impact study on Lewis County, Idaho. The global recession brought about by the 2020 coronavirus pandemic disrupted communities of all sizes, leaving rural communities in particular disproportionately affected in terms of their economy, infrastructure, and decision-making abilities. In 2022, the Hazard and Climate Research Institute, created by Dr. Brand of the Geology Department, began working with the rural community of Kamiah, a city within Lewis County, Idaho, on a resilience assessment, which led to strategizing ways to develop and strengthen the components of the city's overall resiliency. And of course, a significant component of community resilience is the robustness of a community's economy. With the goal of researching taxing policies to create a budgetary cushion for the emergency and local services provided to the Kamiah community, the HCR reached out to the College of Business and Economics for an undergraduate student to take on a research project, and that's where I came in. One thing about local economies is their largest funding source comes from property tax revenues, which are the main source of public funding source for public education, fire and emergency services, and their local infrastructure. And so my curiosity was ignited to answer the research question: how does the average annual salaries of the major industries of Lewis County lead to property tax revenue generation? Employing a fixed effects model, I measured average annual salaries based on Lewis County's 5 most populated industries and how incremental percent changes impact total accumulation of property tax revenues. Or more simply, I wanted to know how funding for fire and emergency services, infrastructure, and public facilities like libraries and K-12 schools change based on increases in salaries in different industries every year. From my findings, although salary increases lead to positive property tax revenue generation across all 5 industries examined, the trade, transportation, and utility industry have the most prominent impact, which includes a Visa Corporation of Kamiah, all types of public transportation, and industries like retail trade. So if the salaries of this industry increase, additional funds could be allocated to disaster mitigation and emergency services, which is impactful and hopeful for the livelihood of the Lewis County community members. As a taxpayer, I want to sympathize. I sympathize with your resistance to higher property tax bills, but something I want to leave you with is that an investment today in disaster mitigation through contributions and property tax revenues to fund kindergartens, elementary schools, roads, highways, water systems, and emergency and medical services is cheaper than fixing major issues years down the road. Strengthening economies of all sizes requires investment from the bottom up, and while COVID-19 is still ongoing, it's better to consider these changes sooner rather than later. Thank you.
My name is Mia Snell-Smith. Today I'll be talking about what toolkit do sagebrush possess to adapt to our changing climate. Climate change will affect our local environment by making it hotter and drier, while also shifting patterns in precipitation. So how do plants, which are mobile, adapt to these changes to ensure their survival? In the Genome to Phenome Lab, we studied big sagebrush, as I'm sure you've all seen on hikes in the foothills and also near the campus greenhouse. And We study the sagebrush because it is a keystone species, which just simply means that it creates essential habitat for so many different organisms like the pygmy rabbit and the sage grouse. And on your left, the sagebrush steppe is heavily fragmented from an array of human activities, and also sagebrush populations have declined by over half in the last few decades. So plants can't escape unfavorable environmental conditions, so they must alter themselves to improve their resiliency. But are these from genetic or individual differences? So we begin to tease this out with our clonal lines in the lab in the greenhouse, which you can see on your right. And this starts off by going into the field, collecting sagebrush seeds, and then germinating them in the lab, and then once they're large enough, I help transplant the plantlets into the greenhouse for experimentation. And so these plantlets have identical genomes, which just simply means that they have the same set of instructions to build an organism. So when they're undergoing these experiments, any differences seen between individuals with these different environmental variables that they're facing will be from individual factors. And through these drought experiments in the greenhouse, our preliminary results have highlighted that there are significant differences in leaf anatomy, but specifically stomata. But what are stomata? So stomata are simply just these little circles on the leaf surface that are key for gas exchange for photosynthesis. So it allows the uptake of carbon dioxide and the release of oxygen. But they're also losing water when they're open. And so they manage this by having different sizes and shapes of stomata, and that will affect their drought response. But this is just one genome and it's in the lab. How do individuals at our Idaho site compare to one another? And so we took microscopy images of peeled back leaf surfaces from the field, and I individually counted and measured the width of stomata. And through this work, our preliminary results show that there are significant differences between sagebrush individuals within a population. And so future work can test for genomic control of these traits for future habitat restoration. Because we really want to ensure that the traits that we place on the landscape now are adapted for it now for their survival, but also as the climate changes through time. But we just don't want to ensure the survival of the sagebrush, because this also means the survival of all the organisms that depend on sagebrush, as well as the survival of the sagebrush steppe ecosystem. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Selva Dosok, and today I'm going to be talking about language needs among resettled refugees. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees defines refugees as people who have to flee their country due to war, violence, conflict, and persecution. Since the start of the resettlement program, over 100 million people have had to flee their countries for these reasons. When refugees flee, their hope is that they're able to be resettled, but only a small fraction of those who flee are actually resettled. Most of them end up spending the rest of their lives in refugee camps, or they're able to return home after the conflict is resolved. In order for refugees to apply for the refugee status, those fleeing must first cross the borders to a neighboring country, and once they apply for the application, they have to wait years until they can find out whether it was accepted or not. And then they have to wait many more years until they are actually resettled. As you can imagine, this continuous journey towards resettlement can lead to a loss of identity, especially in young refugees, because of the constant need to adapt to new surroundings and cultures. Linguists have found that as humans, a lot of our identity is tied to the language that we speak and the way that we express ourselves in those languages. So let's look at some of the reasons for language and identity loss among those who are settled as refugees. To begin with, many refugees are multilingual, and their first language is not the languages taught to their children in schools once they flee their country. This leads to children having to learn new languages so that they can communicate with others in refugee camps, and so that they can gain access to education while they're waiting for resettlement. In the US, the main goals for resettlement are integration into American society and financial self-sufficiency. This means that school-age children are enrolled in schools and adults are enrolled in intensive English learning programs so that they can learn enough English to gain employment. After resettlement, many resettled refugees also aim to increase their English proficiency so that they can improve their economic prospects but this means that children's English proficiency is likely prioritized over maintaining their first language, so most of them end up not learning their first languages. As a business major, and throughout my own resettlement process, I had never stopped to think about the way that my identity was tied to my first language theory. When I first came to the US from Afghanistan last year, I had the opportunity to work with undergraduate linguistics students, teaching them about my language. And through that experience, I came to realize just how important my language and my culture was to me. And because of this, I started thinking more about my language and my own language experiences. In fact, I began examining the kinds of resources there are for Dari speakers who are resettled and the kinds of gaps in my community that could be filled with language-related resources. I've now identified two major gaps: a lack of access to language resources for young children and a lack of access to services in Dari for adults who need to take care of simple things that can improve their lives, like getting their driver's license. In the future, I hope to be able to fill these gaps by working on Dari resources for Afghans in Idaho and across the US, because the young children need to learn their first language and adults need to have access to services so that they can actually integrate into society. And finally, I will continue looking for gaps and work on filling them for my community. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Eaker, and I'm working with the Department of Psychological Science as well as the Department of Sociology. Have you ever wondered why some news articles evoke such strong emotional reactions? In our current age of political polarization, there's been an increasing public reliance on partisan-based online news. This affects all parts of our lives. During the COVID-19 pandemic, like many others, I witnessed the often devastating effects of polarized information. I saw close friendships fall apart, families divided, and communities in turmoil as the pandemic raged on and polarized misinformation spread like wildfire. Similar to the old adage, you are what you eat, you are what you read. Previous research suggests that producers of news media may attempt to sway public opinion through misinformation. But what specific avenues do they use to foster these outcomes and reactions? Our research is focused on exploring the specific linguistic characteristics that are used to sway readers' opinions. Over the course of several months, I compiled 360 news articles into a database. These articles came from sources across the ideological spectrum and centered around three divisive topics: immigration, gun control, and vaccination. And they were also organized in times in which there was either increased or decreased public interest in these topics. Working with Dr. Babick, we performed a text analysis using the software program Diction and a series of two-way ANOVAs to determine the prevalence of specific characteristics in the texts. These variables included measurements such as average word size to more abstract concepts such as diversity and hardship. These were our findings. First, right-leaning sources exhibited more categorical thinking, a greater tendency to overstate their opinion, and a lower likelihood to invite readers to engage critically. In contrast, left-leaning sources showed a greater preference towards using precise statements, towards acknowledging a diversity of viewpoints, and remaining ambivalent about their messages. By extension, radical sources displayed greater authoritarian flexibility and robustness in how they communicate. During times of peak interest in a topic, radical sources asserted information with more certainty than moderate sources, who chose to remain ambivalent. These findings suggest that news articles are crafted to influence audiences' opinions, which can distort information, leading to the spread of misinformation. We are currently expanding this research to identify even more patterns by adding 280 more articles, an additional news source, and an additional topic. We all want to live in a world where facts matter and we can have civil discussions about issues that are important to us. But when news sources use language to manipulate us and sow division, this world becomes harder and harder to achieve. This research reveals the further need to promote informed, unbiased reporting to promote informed public opinion. Additionally, it highlights the importance of critically evaluating news sources. Individually, when consuming news media, it's important to ask yourself, what is the intent of this article? to inform, or to persuade. We can't afford to be complacent in the face of biased and divisive news. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Madeline Gendreau. I'm in the Department of Geosciences and I study glaciers with the CryoGuards Glaciology Lab. Knowing how fast a glacier is moving is important for human and infrastructure safety and for making better predictions about sea level rise due to ice loss. Most glaciers move slowly and may increase or decrease in speed over several years, but some glaciers will rapidly accelerate and move at speeds 10 to 100 times faster than normal on semi-regular intervals. These are called surge-type glaciers. While there are some hypotheses for why some glaciers surge, the mechanisms are still not well understood, partially because it is difficult to track glacier speed on short time intervals. Maps of glacier speeds are now widely available for glaciers around the world, but these data sets only use government satellites. These satellites take images every 1 to 2 weeks, meaning that when it is cloudy, as it often is over glaciers in the winter time, there are no images of the glacier. Often this means entire months will go with no photographs and no data. My research focuses on pioneering the use of PlanetScope satellites to track glacier motion. PlanetScope is a private network of over 200 satellites that have near daily coverage of the Earth's surface, meaning that even in the winter, PlanetScope can get clear images of surging glaciers at least once a week. Additionally, PlanetScope satellites take images with 5 meters of resolution, whereas government satellites are limited to 10 meters of resolution. This means that images from PlanetScope satellites have more detail than images from government satellites. The issue with PlanetScope satellite images is that an entire glacier cannot fit onto one image. Government agencies correct for this with their satellites so that a single image of a glacier can be downloaded, but PlanetScope doesn't. For this project, I've helped develop the images to a point where they can be used to track glacier motion. This primarily focused on stitching the image tiles together, similar to stitching fabric together for a quilt. It can be difficult to create cohesive images because the images are different sizes, some overlap, and some images are much brighter than others because of differences in satellite cameras. The final product of this research is that velocity maps can now be made for nearly every week over the surface of a glacier. On my slide is a black and white image of the Sitkoosa Glacier located in southern Alaska, with a colored velocity map overlaid. This velocity map was made using images from Sitkoosa's most recent surge in September of 2020. The velocity is found by calculating the distance traveled by various points between 2 images of the Sitkoosa Glacier. You'll notice that per the scale bar, this glacier reached speeds of 25 meters per day during this part of its surge. The ability to build these more detailed velocity maps means that scientists will have greater access to current glacier velocities. More accurate estimates will be made about glacial ice loss to the oceans, and government agencies will be able to better inform the public about infrastructure and human safety hazards posed by surging glaciers. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Seamus Jude, and on behalf of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, let's get it started. So, my talk today is going to focus on communication. Communication, of course, is seen as a very positive trait. We would not be here without an immense amount of communication and teamwork done by the people behind the scenes. My lab specifically focuses on bacterial communication. Bacteria, as seen on the left of the slide, rely on these quorum sensing signals, shown as blue spheres, to be able to communicate. When in low cell density, low total population, the signal density is low. And bacteria recognize this by counting the signals around them. This is known as quorum sensing. And when in an isolated environment, bacteria behave as isolated single cells and are mainly harmless in this mode. However, as bacteria population grows, as cell density increases, signal density does as well, and the bacteria realize this. As we move to the right side of the slide, they become pathogenic, scary looking, and many of them develop new traits to be able to evade antibiotics. They act as a team, and they are able to evade our immune system. And again, they know they are ready for this by counting the signals around them. They are ready to poke the bear of our immune system. And if you are going to poke a bear, poke it with your friends around. So, our lab hypothesizes that instead of relying on stronger and stronger antibiotics, which provide a selection pressure and lead to antibiotic resistance over time, we instead cut the communication network, cut bacteria's ability to communicate with one another. How? Well, on the bottom of the slide, we peer inside the cell to see how this may be done. When bacteria want to communicate, they take two components, SAM and ACP, and use a protein highlighted in purple, that I protein, to combine the two and excrete the signal out into the environment. So say, hello, I am here. My job is to break the whole system. I study how the components enter the machine. I study how the machine does the chemistry, so that one day we may develop a new class of anti-therapeutics that do not rely on killing the cell, do not create that selective pressure, but instead revert bacteria from the scary looking things on the right. We trick them into thinking they are isolated. We trick them into thinking they are alone, so that our immune system may more easily deal with them. It is more easy to deal with a problem when the problem cannot act as a team. If you'd like to learn more about the research, I love to talk, and I'm always available for questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Taylor Cook, and I'm from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. And today I'll be talking about the work we do using ionized gas to disinfect pipes. So, as I'm sure many of you know, foodborne illnesses are a major public health concern. It's estimated that there are around 48 million cases of foodborne illness each year, with about 3,000 deaths. This leads to an annual $15 billion economic burden. When presented with foodborne illness, most people think about cleaning the food itself, or perhaps not purchasing the lettuce at Chipotle. But most people don't think about pipes. Pipes are vitally important in food processing and in the transport of drinking water. In both cases, the buildup of bacterial biofilms can cause some major problems. Biofilms, as you can see on the slide, are a collection of bacteria in a web-like matrix that allow them to communicate with their neighbors. This level of communication and the structural stability of the matrix allow them to better withstand traditional methods of disinfection. Biofilms also form layers on the surfaces, allowing them to further be resistant to these methods of disinfection. Oftentimes, cleaning methods can attack the top of the biofilm, but it's very difficult to penetrate into the matrix, so the bacteria towards the bottom remain alive. My work is focused on using a new method of disinfecting industrial pipes from foodborne illness-causing pathogens, like in the dairy industry. We have created a device that allows us to use electricity to ionize a gas, creating something called a plasma. Ionized gases are essentially just gases that have had some of their electrons taken away, so they now carry a positive charge. These gases are very useful at destroying bacterial biofilms because they can seep into the crevices of the matrix and penetrate further into the matrix than traditional methods. Bacteria are also uniquely susceptible to these gases because they do not have the proper tools in their metabolism to break down these gases. So far, we have seen 98% killing in about 5 minutes, and we are continuing to work on increasing the level of killing that we see in that amount of time. Our devices can also be used on a variety of surfaces in addition to pipes, including other industrial surfaces, seeds, chicken, and chronic wounds. If you want to learn more about this, please see our posters that are in the back. Thank you.
my world imploded. She was diagnosed with moderately aggressive breast cancer that had already spread to one of her lymph nodes. I had so many questions. Would she need surgery? Would she need chemotherapy? Would the cancer spread even further? Would she be okay? I wanted to help her so badly, but I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a magician. So when the opportunity came to do cancer research in Dr. Warner's lab, I took it. In our lab, we work to synthesize a new cancer drug that will reduce the spread of breast cancer. The spread of breast cancer is what makes it so deadly, as it often spreads to the lungs, liver, bones, and even brain. One protein, shown here in gold, has been shown to make breast cancer spread more aggressively when it binds to cancer cells. If you can kind of see it, this protein has a pocket on the surface that it uses to bind to cancer cells. So that's where we will target our drug. So our drug is a small molecule that ideally fits perfectly into this pocket, physically preventing the protein from binding to cancer cells, thus reducing the spread of cancer. So I spent my first summer in our lab making many different versions of this molecule, purifying them, and then testing their binding power. Now, the lab bench and I got very close this summer, since to purify these molecules, I have to purify them drop by drop by drop. But now, I use 3D modeling softwares to computationally simulate these molecules and then estimate their binding power, which is much, much faster. So our molecules need to bind about 1,000 times tighter than they currently do. So clearly we are not done optimizing these molecules, but that's one big advantage of computational studies: speed. It's much faster to run a computer simulation than it is to make a bunch of molecules and purify them drop by drop by drop. Sorry. So, over the past 15 months, I have modeled over 130 molecules, synthesized 4 promising leads, discovered 4 promising leads, and synthesized 2 strong inhibitors. Now, this sounds like a lot of molecules, but typically hundreds of molecules are synthesized before one of them moves on to the next phase of drug development. So, clearly, my aim is to speed up this optimizing process so we can get this drug out to cancer patients sooner rather than later. Thankfully, my mother's cancer was caught just before it could spread further. She underwent surgery and has made a full recovery. She was even able to go on this whitewater rafting trip, especially for cancer patients. And I hope to make every breast cancer patient a breast cancer survivor. And thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Holly Olvera. I'm a senior in mechanical engineering, and today I'm going to be talking about the strategies utilized by nulliparous women while negotiating stairs during 4 modes of infant carriage. So who here has carried a baby before? Right. Can we all agree that our back, or our arms, or even our legs feel pretty sore afterwards? Now imagine you're carrying a baby up a flight of stairs in their stroller. There's no ramp around, and there's no one to help you. Do you pick up the stroller? Do you roll it backwards? Probably whatever makes your muscles feel the least amount of impact. So carrying babies has been around for as long as there have been children. For that first year of life, they rely heavily on their caregivers to transport them from place to place. While some baby carriage strategies, such as carrying them in your arms or on a body wrap, like this image, has been around and prevalent through history, modern baby product design has introduced new and alternative methods. Some of these include that stroller or the car seat. However, it's unclear how these new and different methods impact caregiver biomechanics or even injury risk. Research involving mother-baby relationships has often focused just on the babies, regarding how to best provide care for that very vulnerable population. The needs of the perinatal population are therefore vastly understudied. The objective of my study was to understand and find strategies to identify utilized by women when they're negotiating stairs while carrying an infant mannequin. So we designed an obstacle course right outside of our lab, and this mimicked the environment that mothers carry their children in. The space consisted of stairs, a ramp, a curb, and a doorway. We placed high-speed video cameras at each of these locations, and it monitored the movement of the participants. We also use electromyography sensors, and these were placed on the muscles throughout the participant's body. Electromyography sensors are used to calculate muscle activation. So with this, participants carried the baby mannequin in 4 different methods. They used a car seat, stroller, they carried it in their arms, and also in a body carrier. Using the video data, I was able to analyze trials and identify different strategies. When participants use similar strategies, like only using their dominant hand when carrying the car seat, or picking up the stroller every single time when going up the stairs, it was noted. We found that participants had most consistency with the stroller. When they decided to carry the stroller, it was likely that they carried the stroller most times after. In fact, in 38% of our trials, we saw that participants carried the stroller up and down the stairs. So we didn't see this consistency in anything else, not even the body carrier. But we had hypothesized that the stroller would be the most difficult method to carry, especially when approaching stairs. And because of this, we saw that our participants found a strategy and they utilized that throughout. These results show just how important it is to continue discovering how these carrying devices impact mothers. Going forward, we would like to incorporate that muscle activation data that we had collected and find out how that directly impacts the muscles on our body. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Pinney. I'm from the Department of Computer Science. And today I'll be talking about gender in recommender systems and recommendations towards better practices. So you're at home relaxing, scrolling through Netflix, trying to find something new to binge, and you come across the recommended for you category. Netflix, like Amazon, Spotify, Tinder, is a recommendation system, or a system that uses various characteristics about a person to create better recommendations that generate profit. Sorry. In some cases, one of those characteristics is gender. Now, gender isn't binary, but many recommendation systems use a binary gender variable, which can inadvertently reinforce binary gender stereotypes and reify discrimination towards non-binary and transgender individuals. So we surveyed existing research, about 800 papers across 4 conferences, to see how gender was being represented as a variable within recommendation systems, and to develop our own recommendations towards better practices based on our findings. Here, I'll focus on those important recommendations rather than the details of our findings. And those recommendations come in 2 parts. First, when should gender be used and when shouldn't it? And second, when appropriate, how should gender be used? Our primary recommendation in this first part is to truly and seriously consider the use of gender within a given instance and the possible consequences that could result from that use. When user studies or surveys are carried out to assess a system's functionality or fairness, it can be responsible to collect demographic information like gender. But when an e-commerce system, for instance, tries to predict a user's gender based on search behavior, and then use that, and then personalize search results based on that prediction, ethical concerns become far more serious. And it's also never too late to not use gender, so we should be continually reassessing throughout the life of a project whether or not it's appropriate to use gender, given any potential negative outcomes. When thinking about how gender should be used within those more responsible contexts, we can again break things into two parts: collecting new data and using existing data sets. When collecting new data, allow participants to practice autonomy by letting them self-identify their gender. Don't make assumptions, and don't limit gender to a binary construction. When working with existing data sets, do the work to determine where any gender data came from and how it was determined. In any case, provide detailed documentation and thorough discussion about what is being done with gender, why, and any possible limitations that could arise. It's clear that current research and practice in recommendation systems doesn't properly capture the complexity of gender, but it is the responsibility of those building these systems to be more thoughtful and deliberate about the use of gender and the possible effects of that use on increasingly diverse users. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Taylor Ross. I'm with the Department of Music. I'll be talking about postmodern music and architecture, corollaries in form and aesthetic. Most commonly referred to as beginning between the end of World War II and being fully solidified by the liberation movements of the 1960s and 1970s, postmodernism is characterized by paradox and an ironic set of self-contrasting values and characteristics, including unity through disunity in its combined use and juxtaposition of fragmentation, discontinuity, and the incorporation and blending of multiple conventions and perspectives. The stylistic philosophy and the values typified by the progression of the postmodernist cultural movement influenced the arts and remained pervasive throughout the latter half of the 20th century. As a direct result of their co-occurrence during and throughout the postmodernist cultural era, within the architecture and music of the postmodern period, there exists a direct and correlative relationship between the two in matters of form and aesthetic. Carl Jenks, American cultural theorist and architectural historian, states that as abstract art forms based on rhythm, proportion, and harmony, architecture and music share a clear cultural lineage. This lineage can be evidently traced throughout the developments of the postmodern era. The juxtaposition of fragmentation, discontinuity, and the incorporation and blending of multiple conventions and perspectives are acutely represented and visually recognizable within the architecture of the postmodern period. The most notable examples include Philip Johnson's AT&T building and the Portland Municipal Services building by Michael Graves. The juxtaposition of fragmentation, discontinuity, and the incorporation and blending of multiple conventions and perceptions is also represented in many musical works of the postmodernist period. In both popular and Western art music, this is amplified by the technological advancements of the latter half of the 20th century and is represented by the juxtaposition of fragmentation, discontinuity, and the incorporation and blendings of multiple conventions and perspectives made more readily available and apparent by the combination and synthesis of pre-recorded sound, allowing a transcendence of time, place, and genre. While the foundations of this short lecture were in the comparison of postmodern architecture and postmodern music, I came to realize that fundamentally, this topic primarily concerned itself with the summation and materialization of the subjective value systems that circulate within our daily lives. For example, the Boise State Center for the Visual Arts, in its totality, is a physical representation and materialization of the subjective values of this postmodern era. While any level of importance is inherently subjective, this aspect of our social cultural fabric is pertinent. The values that exist abstractly between groups and individuals and which disseminate amorphously within a given social cultural climate inevitably find themselves transmogrified into the physical reality that we occupy, the physical spaces and the physiological perceptions that inevitably influence, assemble, and establish our daily lived experiences. As abstract art forms based on rhythm, proportion, and harmony, music and architecture inherently share commonalities in form and aesthetic, especially architecture and music that develop concurrently within a specified historical cultural aesthetic period. Through the lens of their philosophical values and characteristics, including unity through disunity and the combined use and inclusion of fragmentation, discontinuity, and the incorporation and blending of multiple conventions and perspectives, as a direct result of their co-occurrence during and throughout the postmodernist cultural era, we can see that within the art forms of architecture, and music of the postmodernist cultural period, there exists a direct and correlative relationship in matters of form and aesthetic, and more so that the subjective value systems of our own time period will inevitably formulate and materialize themselves into their own concrete and physical reality. I'd like to thank Dr. Zach Bowie, Dr. Rachel Becker, and Dr. Eric Alexander, who taught me just as much about myself as they taught me about music. And if you can, come see the Boise State Music Department's full choir orchestra concert this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. It's free for students and staff. Thank you.
Last but not least. Hi, my name is Alana Sigler. I'm from BSU's very own sociology department, and I'm here today to talk to you about collective conversations around racism and anti-racism in the United States. In these next few minutes, I'm going to tell you about the problem with racism, or more specifically with how we think about racism. As a sociologist, I'm fascinated by the way we think about ourselves and the world around us. And racism is something that we all need to be thinking, talking, and caring about. The image behind me is my own artwork and a creative summation of my research from a course where I engaged in collective conversations around racism and anti-racism in the United States. In my research, I was confronted with a problem. As a society, we tend to view racism and race as a problem for exclusively Black and brown people, leaving the burden of educating and advocating exclusively on the shoulders of people of color. This mindset develops because of how we view racism, as a singular social problem. But racism isn't a singular social problem. It's a social structure. It might help to think about social structures as trees. With this mindset and logic, we can understand that racism didn't just simply appear one day, but was grown. Rooted into the ground by capitalism, imperialism, white supremacy, and colonialism, fertilized by racist policy and an unequal distribution of power, watered by the intersection of discrimination based on class, gender, sexuality, ability, religion, and immigration status. The tree of racism is large, with many branches that stretch into other social structures, rooting new trees and creating endless barriers for people of color. Racism branches into healthcare, where 10.6% of African Americans are uninsured, nearly double the amount of white Americans. Racism branches into housing, where only 44% of Black and Hispanic Americans own their own homes, drastically lower than the 72.3% of white Americans. Racism branches into the U.S.'s criminal justice system, where people of color are disproportionately imprisoned at alarming rates, with 1 out of every 3 Black men expecting to be incarcerated in his lifetime. Racism branches into labor, where roots of classism and sexism aid in its growth, where women of color make only 60 cents for every dollar a white man makes. Society has grown the tree of racism, but it has also grown the tree of hope and anti-racism, rooted into the ground by community, conversations, and connection, fertilized by activists and policy change, watered by protest, education, validation, and acknowledgement. Today, we have all taken the first step. We have begun a collective conversation, pushing ourselves to better understand racism. I'll leave you with this quote from Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories from the Transformative Justice Movement. Be here, be all over the place, be messy, be wrong, be bold in your hopefulness, be confused in community, be reaching past isolation, be part of the problem, be hungry for after, be helpful in the midst, be so early in the process, be broken by belief, and be bolstered by brave comrades. Thank you.
Can we have a round of applause for all of our amazing speakers?
anybody who has ever had to stand on a stage, use a mic, and talk to a room full of people, it's hard, okay? That was amazing. Great job.